Question number one: what is the overall situation in Ukraine since the start of the civil war? The situation has been an aggravation of the problems that led to the civil war in the first place. The original reason for the Euromaidan demonstrations that overthrew the former president Viktor Yanukovych was a growing economic crisis, growing debt in the country, and effectively the source behind the protest was it's often mistakenly called European integration agreement for Ukraine. I mean, but it was a rejection of by Yanukovych of basically a free trade deal of the European Union that imposed some serious austerity measures. Um, since the new government came into power, they've been implementing these austerity measures. They've affected pensions, salaries of public employees. They've been laying people off. Um, the pension has been hit dramatically. The most precarious people in Ukraine are the pensioners, and as of right now, Ukraine is really has the lowest pensions in the world relative to the cost of living. Now, the cost of living is yet another issue. The Ukrainian currency, which really it shows how much faith these Western bankers have in this new pro-European government. The Ukrainian currency has lost 2/3 of its value compared to the U.S. dollar since this beginning of the Euromaidan events. And Ukraine's credit rating is now the lowest among all of the countries that have credit ratings. So you can imagine how bad that is. So despite these high ambitions of the start of Euromaidan, as they said to, and corruption has arguably increased. It's just bureaucrats previously loyal to Yanukovych have been replacing by fresh new bureaucrats loyal to some other oligarch who are trying to get theirs now because they realize they might not be in power so long. In general, the situation is pretty bad for the Ukrainian people, and to boot, many of them are getting mobilized to fight the rebel army. If you have means in Ukraine, you can buy your way out of the army, or you can get sent to somewhere that's not safe, that's more safe, away from the fighting. A lot of the supporters of Euromaidan, a lot of the most patriotic people, so-called, that like to think of themselves as the most patriotic people in the country, that will, shout, "Kill the terrorists, death to the enemies." Those a lot come from middle class Kiev people. So they actually, when they get mobilized or volunteer, they don't get sent out to the front. They get sent to the places occupied by the Ukrainian army. They're taken from the rebels to search these areas for separatists, which is basically witch hunts for any people that had support for the anti-Maidan protests. The people that get sent to the front that die the most are the poorest of the poor Ukrainians from villages in central Ukraine, western Ukraine, all around Ukraine, mostly western Ukraine, who did not really participate in the Euromaidan protests, had no part in overthrowing Yanukovych, but since they're the poorest, they can't bribe their way out of the army, so they're the ones who get sent out. And it's a very sad situation. A lot of them, the times, they're the sole breadwinners of the family. So that's where the mothers and wives protests came from in the past months. And actually, right now, there's quite a few people dodging the draft. There's reports from border towns along the western borders in Romania and Moldova, where the hotels are being packed with draft dodgers. I believe the last mobilizations, only 60% of the people even responded to the mobilizations under the threat of arrest. So this number of draft dodgers is getting quite high. There's of course there's been an accompaniment of nationalist hysteria in the media. All of the media in Ukraine is owned by the oligarchs, so they dictate what's being said, and what's being said recently has been that the rebels, they're all terrorists, they're all Russian agents. The story changes. The objectives are the same, is to get people riled up against this so-called external threat from the rebels, and not to look at what's going on inside the country, which is the oligarchs continuing to loot as they did the country. And frankly, the oligarchs, the power right now, they're able to imprison critics of the government, not just people supporting the rebellion, which they do just by internet messages. You can get arrested, you get put to jail. There have been people put to jail like that. They're even just they arrested even journalists formerly friendly to the Euromaidan movement. Ruslan Kotsaba has recently been arrested. He went to Donbass. He saw that it was Ukrainians against Ukrainians fighting. He openly called for people to avoid getting mobilized, because he said they were just cannon meat. And he recently got arrested. So that's the situation right now. And the second question: what is the nature of the and role of the Kiev government? The Kiev government is still oligarchs. They're not anyone new. They're not any new young generation. For the most part, the people at the top are still the people that own the means of production and the have all the means in the country. Same people that looted the country for the past more than 20 years. It's just kind of a different section of the oligarchy that has power now. Actually, Poroshenko, he was one of the founding members of the party of the former president Yanukovych. So the Kiev government the people on top continue to loot. They've incorporated after Euromaidan, they've incorporated a lot of the people who participated in the overthrow of Yanukovych in Kiev. A lot of them are far-right elements, like some right sectors. So since the latest parliamentary election, we have a couple of right sector MPs. This is a far-right paramilitary group, we can say now. They're fighting against the rebels in Donbass. That was kind of a common theme for the president's party, for Poroshenko's party, and the prime minister's party, and Natsyunuk's party, People's Front, to take members from the National Guard battalions. Some of them are open far-right members. Andrei Beletsky, who's also in parliament, he's an open neo-Nazi. Vadim Troyan, who was appointed the chief of police for the Kiev region, is also a far-right member of the Azov battalion. These battalions are actually kind of, they're shadow back to the feudal times. They're sponsored by one oligarch, another, Kolomoisky, who is Jewish, but he sponsors a neo-Nazi. He's an oligarch, so he sponsors a neo-Nazi Azov battalion, who has the wolf's angel on their insignia. And they've been known to commit atrocities against the civilian population, to hunt down suspected terrorists. So the third question: what are the reasons behind the Donbass rebellion? Actually, Yanukovych, the previous president, he was a corrupt politician. He was an oligarch, of course. He was backed by the most powerful oligarchs financially in the country, but he lost favor with them. But I mean, he did have some base and support in the east of the country, and particularly in the south, who elected him. So when they saw, I guess it was not so much that the overthrow of Yanukovych that upset them. What upset them was that the people that replaced Yanukovych, I mean, Yanukovych was overthrown with all these great words that will end corruption, will restore, legitimate people to government, will put legitimate people in power. But the people that came to power were just oligarchs. Turchinov, the president that was appointed, was an oligarch. They appointed, very cynically, just oligarchs to govern the regions where the anti-Maidan movement started. The Arsen Avakov to Kharkov region. Sergei Taruta, a billionaire oligarch, to the Donetsk region. And they gave Igor Kolomoisky, who I just mentioned, the Dnipropetrovsk region. So you can imagine it was a slap in the face to these Donbass people, particularly the politically active ones. So they saw, one oligarch getting overthrown at Kiev in an armed coup. They thought, I mean, why can't they continue to overthrow their own oligarchs, that were just, not even elected, just installed like that. So many of them started taking up arms. This, of course, the region of Donbass formerly accounted for 40% of Ukraine's industrial production, of Ukraine's GDP, actually. So it's a very Ukraine's industry is really much concentrated there, with mining, metal, chemical works. It used to be, anyways, before it got bombed out from the Civil War. But this was a very working class region by nature. So a lot of the revolt was working class. This is also where, not coincidentally, where the Communist Party of Ukraine, which is very, very deformed right now, where it had its popular base, if it had one. And now the people started taking up arms against the new Kiev government, and also the fact that also many Russian nationalists came over. It brought a lot of, I guess it was a response to Ukrainian nationalism on one hand. I guess it brought out some Russian nationalists as well. I guess it's important to note that there wasn't any kind of anything close to a Bolshevik party there, trying to get the masses, to get this struggle against the oligarchs, against capitalism. So a lot of the movement was taken by some nationalist forces, some forces even loyal to Moscow. Um, previously Russia had taken Crimea, obviously with popular support from the Crimean population, but they had just taken it, and people saw that as the way out. But Ukraine responded with. But initially the overall demand was just federalization, to have more autonomy for these regions. But this was answered by Ukraine with armed forces. Many of these, when they started coming to these rebel cities, many of the soldiers in the Ukrainian army just defected to the rebel side, or stopped fighting, or just said we're not going to fight, because they were from these regions and these were their own people. They had no loyalty to these new oligarchs that came to power. So people forget that this was something publicized. For example, on the ignorantly titled Russian Roulette series of Simon Ostrovsky, for example. I mean, you can see this. I mean, there's video. This is not. The rebellion has its base in Donbass, and right now. What's the perspective of the anti-fascist forces? I mean, they've actually had to fight fascists sent from Ukraine, Donbass. Of course, and they have their own problems. They have forces. I mean, that are governing the Donbass republics are those that have the most favor from Moscow. The reason for this is because these republics, they depend on Moscow for support, not just military aid, but humanitarian aid, all the more, in order to provide for the population that's been cut off from Ukraine, from pension funds, from medical funds, electricity, gas. So if you control the resources, you have a lot of political power in the end. And a lot of the anti-fascist, more progressive forces in these republics are also at the front, fighting the Ukrainian army. So the perspective for them, while there's still a war going on, while there's still this extreme scarcity, it's a very hard situation for them. It's going to be the people that are going to be coming on top are going to be people that get the most resources from Moscow. But in a time of peace, I think this is an interesting perspective. In a time of when it's time to rebuild the area, rebuild the regions, they will have to. This won't be done by any. Private enterprises. This will be done by the workers of Donbass, the most, and this will require a certain element of planification as well, of community involvement. So this could really if this ceasefire holds in any way, this could be an opportunity for the progressive forces to come out. And of course, a lot of it has to do as well with what happens in Ukraine. The oligarchs in Kiev can't do what they do forever. At some points, there will be another recoil, like there was. If Yanukovych could be overthrown, so can the other oligarchs. Now, whether whoever replaces these oligarchs in Kiev, whether these forces are progressive or not, is going to depend on a number of things. But I guess one perspective is that right now more and more Ukrainians are against the war, and it's really the far right has been the most pro-war. So we could envision a certain backlash against this far right, against this nationalist hysteria, but that's to be seen.